Either you work this Sunday or you work somewhere else. It's a simple calculation. I won't choose either.
My computer screen went black, then lit up with a message that felt like a slap report to HR immediately. No explanation, no context, just the kind of command someone sends when they believe authority makes them bulletproof. I hadn't even stood up before I sensed the trap waiting for me behind that door. Bryce Hargrove, 37 years old, freshly imported from Memphis and already walking like the building was named after him, stood beside HR with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. He had the posture of a man who believed youth, a tailored suit, and a loud voice could compensate for inexperience. Diane from HR held a clipboard as if she was auditioning for the gatekeeper. "Grayson," Bryce said, stretching my name like he was doing me a favor, "you're scheduled for mandatory overtime this Sunday." He slid a form across the table. The header read, "Voluntary Overtime Agreement." Under it, stamped in red ink sign immediately or face disciplinary action. And honestly, before things spiral any further, let me ask you this, where are you listening from right now? I always love seeing people check in from every corner of the world, and while we're talking about disasters waiting to happen, apparently 95% of you are listening without subscribing, which hurts my feelings just a little. So if you're enjoying the story so far, tap that subscribe button. It keeps this channel alive and keeps these corporate meltdowns coming your way. Now, let's get back to the moment Bryce thought he could intimidate me. A lesser man might have choked. I only raised an eyebrow. At 51, I've learned that nothing is more suspicious than the word voluntary printed in capital letters. Bryce leaned forward, arms crossed high, chin lifted an inch too far. His whole body broadcasted one message: I dare you to push back. "I won't be working Sunday," I said evenly. Bryce blinked, as if the word no didn't exist in the languages he understood. "Let me make this simple. Grayson, show up Sunday morning, or don't show up Monday at all." He waited for panic, for bargaining, for something. Instead, I smiled, slow, polite, and just insulting enough to be honest. "Well, Bryce, you go ahead and choose whatever option works best for you." A flicker of confusion crossed his face, then irritation, then the realization that I wasn't bluffing. I placed the unsigned form back on the table, perfectly aligned with the edge, just to annoy him, and as I walked out, I felt his stare burning into my back. He thought he'd cornered me. He thought Sunday was his weapon. What he didn't know was that my Sunday meeting, the one he tried to block, would bring this entire company to its knees within 48 hours. If walking out of that HR office on Friday felt like stepping out of a trap, then walking back through the memories of the past 5 years felt like reopening an old bruise. It didn't hurt all at once, it pulsed, quietly and steadily. The way disappointment does after you've given too much of yourself to a place that never fully deserved it. My time at Summit Stream Distribution hadn't started as a battlefield. In the beginning, it felt like a place where hard work still mattered, and for 5 years, I poured everything I had into it, back then. Under my old manager, Marcus Flynn, things were different. He used to clap me on the shoulder and say, "Grayson, you're the guy I send in when the room is already on fire." I believed him. I lived by it. I rescued 4 major contracts that should have collapsed, pulled last-minute restructurings out of thin air, and showed up every time the company needed someone steady. I worked through weekends. I worked through holidays. I even missed my daughter's college graduation to keep a client from walking out the door. At the time, I told myself it was sacrifice. Now I know it was something closer to blindness. The shift began the week Bryce Hargrove arrived, freshly shipped from Memphis. He strutted into the department with the confidence of a man who'd read exactly one leadership book and decided it made him an expert. He didn't bother learning my name before announcing new rules in a tone that was half coach, half tyrant. Soon enough, critiques that used to be private started happening in front of the entire team. If he felt bored, he'd sharpen himself by cutting down whoever was closest. And somehow, that was almost always me, one morning, after I saved yet another account from dissolving. I overheard Bryce tell another manager, "Yeah, Wells is competent, but honestly, I think he's overrated." He didn't bother lowering his voice. A few of the younger employees looked away, unsure whether to nod or pretend they hadn't heard him. I pretended I hadn't, too, but the shame sat somewhere deep, heavy as wet cloth. What made it worse was how subtle the rest of it was. Quiet shoves, small humiliations, a meeting invite mysteriously missing my name, a project reassigned without explanation. And then came the moment that hit harder than I expected, a young intern, cheeks flushing, whispering, I heard Bryce say you might be too old for the company's new direction." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The sting answered for me. Not long after, I learned 2 senior staff members, both veterans of the company, had vanished after private meetings with Bryce shortly before I joined. No announcements, no explanations, just gone. That was the moment something in me shifted. I opened a blank document on my laptop, titled it Hargrove Log, and started writing down everything. Because at 51, you learn that the worst betrayals are the quiet ones, and you learn to keep receipts. By the time Sunday morning arrived, the building was still heavy with the memory of Bryce's threat, but I walked into that private conference suite with a calm so sharp it felt engineered. The harbor outside was quiet, the kind of stillness that makes every decision echo louder. I had rehearsed the numbers, the projections, the risks, but as soon as the door opened, I realized this meeting was never about data, it was about truth, and whether anyone in my company still deserved it. Charles Denham, CEO of Northbridge Retail Group, entered first tall, controlled, and already studying me as if he were confirming a hypothesis. His CFO, Marissa Coates, followed with a folder held tight against her chest, her expression the kind professionals wear when they know something has been mishandled for far too long. "Grayson," Charles said, shaking my hand with a grip that meant business, not pleasantries. "Thank you for meeting on a Sunday." "I appreciate the invitation," I replied evenly. "I understand this is time-sensitive." Marissa wasted no time. She placed the folder on the table, opened it deliberately, and turned the pages toward me. "We'll get straight to the point," she said. "These are the correspondence logs from the past 8 weeks." I leaned in. Each page held a list of emails Northbridge had sent to Summit Stream concerns, clarifications, red flags, every single one marked unanswered. At the bottom of several entries was a note in small text, "Deleted by user." My breath didn't quicken. My pulse didn't spike. I simply let the information settle, piece by piece, like someone arranging evidence on a table. "None of these reached me," I said quietly. "We assumed as much." Charles replied, his voice sharpened, losing its corporate softness, "which is why we pulled the server logs. These emails were manually deleted." Marissa closed the folder. "By your new manager, Bryce Hargrove." For a moment, the room felt colder, not from fear, but from clarity. Bryce hadn't just tried to intimidate me. He had been burying the very issues that kept our largest client afloat. Charles clasped his hands and leaned forward. "We're aware of his management style. We're also aware he's been obstructing you." He exhaled through his nose, slow and deliberate. "Your company is in serious trouble, Grayson." Then he paused long enough for the weight to land. "But you are not." The sentence cut through the room with surgical precision. Marissa added, "We trust your integrity more than Summit Stream's leadership. That's why we asked for you directly." Then came the twist no one at Summit Stream would have ever predicted, Charles said. "We will not renew this contract unless you become our exclusive point of contact effective immediately." The world didn't tilt. It didn't crash. It simply aligned. And in that razor-sharp stillness, I understood something with absolute certainty. Tomorrow wasn't the day they fired me. It was the day they got judged. Saturday mornings were supposed to be the quiet part of the week, the hours when I could breathe before Monday arrived with its usual chaos. Instead, I walked into Summit Stream with the uneasy awareness that Bryce wouldn't wait until Sunday to make his next move. People like him rarely have patience. They prefer the thrill of instant punishment, and judging by the heavy silence spreading across the office as I arrived, he was already hunting for me. I had barely logged in when I heard the sharp, familiar rhythm of Bryce's footsteps marching down the aisle. He always walked like he wanted the floor to know who was in charge. Then he stopped directly at my desk, hovering with the energy of a storm cloud. "Everyone here makes sacrifices," he snapped, loud enough for 3 rows of cubicles to hear. "So what makes you think you're special, Grayson?" I looked up slowly, letting the tension stretch until it hummed. "If I were special," I said with a flat smile, "you wouldn't feel the need to stand here yelling about it." A few employees glanced over before immediately looking away, pretending their keyboards required absolute concentration. Bryce's jaw tightened. He hated comebacks most when they were true. He didn't argue. He didn't threaten. He simply turned on his heel and walked away with a stiffness that told me he had something worse planned. And within minutes, the real blow landed. My screen flashed, access denied. I tried again, another alert. This client folder is restricted. 2 major accounts, ones I had managed for years, were suddenly locked, not reassigned, not updated, locked, and only someone with Bryce's clearance could do that. A moment later, my inbox chimed. Subject line: failure to comply, immediate concern, CCHR, Operations Oversight, Compliance Archive. The message read like a police report. Employee Grayson Wells continues to exhibit resistance to management direction regarding weekend availability. This behavior may impact client obligations. I exhaled slowly, forcing my shoulders to stay relaxed as the heat built at the back of my neck. This wasn't discipline. This was premeditation, a staged narrative designed to make me look uncooperative before Monday even arrived. Classic Bryce: create a problem, blame someone else, then act like he saved the day. Still, I refused to give him the performance he wanted. I took screenshots of the access alerts, screenshots of the timestamps, screenshots of his email, then quietly saved everything to a folder labeled Saturday Incident. If Bryce wanted to build a case against me, he had no idea I was already building one of my own brick by brick, fact by fact. And as I stared at the locked folders on my screen, I couldn't help the smallest, sharpest smile from forming. I had no idea that in the process of trying to bury me, Bryce had just dug his own grave with nothing more than a single, reckless click. By the time Saturday night settled into the walls of my apartment, I felt the exhaustion of the entire week sitting in my shoulders like an old, familiar weight, but beneath it somewhere quieter. Steadier was a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Bryce had thrown everything he could at me that weekend: threats, public humiliation, locked files, falsified narratives, and yet the only thing I felt in that moment was a cool, deliberate calm. The kind that arrives not when you're cornered, but when you finally stop cooperating with the corner. I sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and read the chain of emails one more time: the warnings, the accusations, the forced urgency Bryce loved to weaponize. I used to read messages like that with a knot in my chest. Tonight, the knot wasn't there. It had unraveled sometime between his shouting and the moment he realized yelling wouldn't make me bow. So I typed my response slow, precise. Without a single word more than necessary, I have an immovable commitment on Sunday. I will be present at 9 o'clock Monday morning as scheduled. No apology, no nervous explanation, just a statement of fact. I hovered over the send button only long enough to confirm my own intention. Then I pressed it. The moment it left my outbox, something inside me shifted, not triumph, not rebellion. Something simpler, like a breathing in air that wasn't borrowed from anyone else. It was the first decision I had made for myself in a long time, and the quiet of it felt powerful. Still, clarity doesn't excuse carelessness. I moved methodically, screenshots of every locked folder alert, every time-stamped error message, every snippet of Bryce's fabricated evidence. I copied the Friday HR summons, the overtime form stamped in red, his Saturday email laced with false urgency. I captured each piece, cataloging them with the precision of someone who knew the storm wasn't over, but finally understood he didn't have to stand unarmed. Then I created the folder that would become my Shield Hargrove case file. Every document, every log, every trace went inside. I didn't do it out of fear. I did it because for the first time in years, I wasn't trying to prove my loyalty. I was protecting my dignity with the folder saved and backed up. I closed my laptop. The apartment was still, a soft hum from the refrigerator, a faint glow from the streetlights, and an unexpected ease settling in my chest. It surprised me how light I felt. I'd spent so many years bending toward the company, toward deadlines, emergencies, crises that weren't even mine, that I'd forgotten what it meant to choose something different, to choose myself. And as I sat there, hands resting loosely on the table, a thought came to me with cold, unwavering certainty. I didn't know it then, but that simple. Measured email, the one Bryce expected to fear, would become the very thing that slipped the noose around his career the next morning. It turns out choosing neither option was the choice that changed everything. Monday mornings usually carried a predictable rhythm at Summit Stream: the shuffle of keyboards waking up, the low hum of coffee machines, the inevitable flood of weekend emails. But that morning, the quiet felt wrong, too clean, too intentional. after everything Bryce had pulled. I walked into the building, fully prepared to be escorted straight to HR. What I didn't expect was nothing. No termination email, no calendar invite, no summons. Not even one of Bryce's theatrical threats waiting in my inbox. It was the kind of silence that doesn't reassure. It warns. I set my bag down and logged in, feeling the strange weight of the absence settling across my shoulders. The usual Monday chaos was missing. My team moved around me with stiff politeness, offering tight nods instead of greetings. Lena, one of the few coworkers who still had some courage left, passed by slowly. "Morning," she whispered. Though her eyes said something different, "Be careful." I tried to respond, but my throat felt dry. My screen continued loading, no warnings, no locked folders this time, not even an acknowledgement of the chaos Bryce had stirred up 2 days earlier. The stillness made me uneasy. If Bryce was planning another ambush, he was cutting it oddly close at exactly 9:15. My desk phone rang. A number I had never seen before flashed on the display, executive line direct. I picked up carefully. "This is Grayson." The reply was calm, steady, completely unexpected. "Grayson, congratulations," a voice said. "Please come to my office on the executive floor." It was Richard Hale, the CEO of Summit Stream. For a moment, I couldn't move. My brain scrambled to make sense of the words, trying to fit them into any version of the morning I had prepared for. But nothing matched, not the tone, not the message, not the lack of HR in the sentence. "On my way." I managed. The walk to the elevator felt long and strangely weightless. My shoes echoed across the tile, each step sounding louder than it should have in a building that usually buzzed before sunrise. As the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, the air felt different, thicker somehow, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. And that's when I saw it. Bryce's office door was shut, the metal nameplate beside it gone. The glass window covered with a temporary privacy film. A strip of red tape sealed the doorframe. A security guard stood outside, hands clasped in front of him. He didn't look bored. He looked alert. Lena must have followed me up the hall without my noticing. She stopped beside me, her voice barely a whisper. "They sealed his office this morning. No one knows why." I nodded slowly. My heart beat steady but cold. This wasn't a routine reassignment. This wasn't a quiet demotion. This looked like evidence containment. And for a split second, as coworkers peeked from behind cubicle walls, I caught the shift in their expressions. They weren't looking at Bryce's office like it belonged to a manager anymore. They were looking at it the way people look at a crime scene. I swallowed hard and stepped toward the CEO's door, realizing something with chilling clarity. Whatever waited for me inside wasn't the end of my career. It was the beginning of the reckoning, the moment I stepped into the executive boardroom. The temperature of the entire morning changed. It wasn't warmer or colder, just sharper, like the air had learned how to cut. Richard Hale sat at the head of the table, posture straight, expression carved in stone. To his left were 2 members of legal, laptops open and humming. To his right sat Diane from HR, stiff as a marble statue, fingers laced too tightly. "Grayson," Richard said, motioning for me to sit. "We've been busy this morning." That was an understatement. As soon as I sat down, the head of legal turned her laptop toward me. "We initiated an internal audit at 6:30 this morning," she began, "triggered by concerns raised by Northbridge yesterday evening. What we found is extensive." She clicked through a series of files one after another, each more damning than the last. First, falsified KPI reports, graphs altered, performance metrics inflated, negative trend lines replaced with fabricated improvements, all edits traced back, time-stamped, and authenticated under one profile, B. Hargrove. Second, a folder labeled Client Correspondence Logs. Inside every email Northbridge had sent over the past 2 months, every single one deleted. The auto backup logs showed the truth. In black and white, the deletions were manual, performed from Bryce's workstation during his logged-in sessions. Third, a federal labor compliance violation list 3 counts, forced overtime without documented consent, retaliatory scheduling, threatening language archived in HR complaints from employees who mysteriously resigned. Fourth, internal complaints, 3 of them, all ignored, all routed directly to Bryce's inbox, none escalated. Diane swallowed. "We did not see those until this morning," she said quietly. The room stayed still, heavy with the weight of everything that had been hidden. Legal continued. "The most critical evidence is here." She clicked once more, revealing a system log dozens of entries long. These are the auto backup server traces showing exactly who deleted Northbridge's emails. My eyes scanned the screen. User B. Hargrove action delete timestamp matches Bryce's Saturday Concerns email about my supposed resistance. Richard leaned back, exhaling through his nose. He tried to bury client concerns, then attempted to frame you for non-cooperation. The satisfaction that settled in my chest wasn't loud. It wasn't fiery. It was quiet cold, like justice poured into a glass and served neat. Richard continued, effective immediately. Bryce Hargrove has been terminated. No ceremony, no apology, just a clean, unemotional sentence wiping away months of manipulation. Then he lifted a new folder. And now, for you. I braced myself. We want you to step in as Director of Strategic Client Relations, he said. Northbridge specifically requested you. Your integrity kept them here. We trust you to rebuild what he tried to destroy for the first time in a long time. I felt something warm, recognition without strings. I nodded slowly. I'll accept. The boardroom shifted, relief loosening shoulders around the table. But inside me, the calm deepened into something colder, because justice wasn't finished, not yet. I hadn't seen Bryce's face, and I would, before the day was over. Stepping into my new office that morning felt surreal, not triumphant, not victorious, just lighter, like someone had quietly lifted a weight I didn't realize I had been dragging for years. The chaos of the audit, the downfall of Bryce, the sudden promotion, it all settled into a single, steady truth. The team needed something different, something humane, and for the first time in a long while. I felt ready to give it by mid-morning. I'd gathered my department in the small conference room just outside my office. The air was tense at first, the kind of tension that comes from too many months spent bracing for the next insult. People sat stiffly, eyes flicking to the doorway as if expecting Bryce to storm in at any moment, barking orders. Old habits die hardest when they're carved from fear. I opened the meeting simply. We're starting fresh, I said, folding my hands on the table. So let's make a few things clear. Heads lifted, not dramatically, just enough to show the room was listening again, maybe for the first time in months. First, I continued, no more forced overtime. If you ever work on a weekend again, it will be because you choose to, not because someone threatened your job. A few eyebrows rose, cautious but hopeful. Second, I said, no more public shaming. Feedback is private, respectful, and meant to help, not humiliate. We're professionals, not props in someone's power show. People shifted, shoulders relaxed. Someone exhaled a breath they'd probably been holding since Bryce's first staff meeting. And third, I added, this department will not be run on the idea that younger is automatically smarter or better. Experience matters. You matter. We're building a team, not a competition. For a moment, the room was silent, too silent. Then, near the back of the table, I saw something I didn't expect. Frank Dalton, 60 years old, 28 years with the company, and a man who had survived 5 regimes of terrible managers, bowed his head and wiped his eyes. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, trembling gesture of someone who had endured too much for too long. Thank you, he whispered. I thought they'd squeeze me out next. That hit deeper than I was prepared for. Frank, I said softly, you're exactly the kind of person this place should have protected. The room shifted all at once. Laughter not loud, just warm, broke the tension. Team members glanced at one another, sharing small smiles, the kind that only appear when people feel safe enough to breathe. Later that day, I met briefly with CEO Richard Hale. He leaned against his desk and said, Grayson, we don't need leaders who shout. We need leaders who understand people. What you did this morning, that's leadership. His words didn't inflate me, they anchored me. For the first time in years, the department felt whole again. People worked with a quiet energy, a rhythm that wasn't forced but reclaimed. Even the hallways felt different, as if the building itself exhaled. But peace, in corporate life, is always temporary. Because that afternoon, the calm lasted exactly 3 minutes until the whispers started forming in the hallway. The whispers in the hallway started as a faint ripple, the kind that makes people lift their heads just slightly. Caught between curiosity and caution, by the time I stepped out of my office, The ripple had turned into a low current of movement, subtle, but unmistakable. Something was happening, something big, and the building seemed to feel it before anyone said a word. I followed the quiet commotion toward the glass atrium near the lobby. Employees lined the corridor, pretending to check their phones or adjust paperwork, but their eyes kept drifting toward the same spot. That's when I saw the two security officers appear, walking in slow, measured steps, each positioned on either side of a man carrying a cardboard box. Bryce Hargrove. His shoulders, normally pulled back in a performance of confidence, were hunched and trembling. His tie hung crooked, his shirt slightly untucked. He clutched the box like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Inside it were the remnants of the power he once tried to wield: a nameplate, a stack of papers, a cheap metal water bottle, and whatever pride he had left, if any still remained. No one greeted him. No one lowered their gaze in sympathy. No one nodded a polite goodbye. The entire hallway held its breath, watching the man who had treated them like interchangeable gears now walk out like a defective part being returned to the manufacturer. Bryce's eyes flicked across the room, searching for even one friendly face, but all he found were blank stares and turned shoulders. He had spent months demanding fear. He left without earning a single ounce of respect. When he drew closer, he saw me standing at the end of the corridor. His steps faltered. His grip on the box tightened. He didn't slow down, didn't greet me, didn't attempt some final, venomous remark. Instead, he shifted his gaze to the floor, cowardly, evasive, like a man trying to sidestep his own reflection. I didn't speak. I didn't smirk. I didn't offer even the smallest reaction. I simply stood there, grounded and silent, letting the weight of the moment settle exactly where it belonged. And somehow, my silence felt louder than any speech I could have given. Silence has a way of telling the truth without raising its voice. For someone like Bryce, it was the cleanest sentence imaginable, as the security officers guided him through the revolving doors and out of Summit Stream for the final time. The crowd slowly dispersed, returning to their desks with a quiet sense of closure, maybe even justice. But as I stepped back into my office, a new notification popped onto my phone, a message from the CEO of Northbridge Retail Group. And in that instant, I realized the final blow of the day hadn't come from Summit Stream at all, but from the one person Bryce had underestimated most. The notification from Northbridge appeared just as the building finally settled after Bryce's exit. It was brief, almost too brief for what it meant. Contract renewed, 5 years. And then a second message followed, this time directly from Charles Denham. Because of you, Summit Stream lives. I sat back in my new office chair, letting those words settle. The room still felt slightly unfamiliar, bigger than what I was used to, quieter than any space I'd occupied in years, but the sunlight warming the glass walls made it feel like something I could grow into, maybe even something I had deserved long before today. Outside my window, the city moved with its usual Monday resilience, people heading to work, delivery trucks weaving through traffic, a normal rhythm carrying on, unaware that my entire life had just shifted. And, strangely, as I watched it all, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't known in years, steady, grounded, earned. My team worked differently now. The hallways no longer tightened when footsteps approached. Conversations didn't drop into silence. People weren't glancing over their shoulders, waiting for Bryce's temper to strike. Instead, there was a sense of breath, a quiet reclaiming of dignity. Seeing that change unfold made something inside me loosen, like a knot finally untying after years of being pulled too tight. I opened my inbox and reviewed the finalized Northbridge agreement. 5 years of stability, hundreds of jobs secured, and the quiet knowledge that choosing myself instead of Bryce's Sunday ultimatum had shifted the fate of an entire company. I clicked open a blank email, no recipient, no subject, just space. The cursor blinked calmly, waiting. And with a steadiness I hadn't felt in a long time, I typed a single sentence meant only for me. Sometimes choosing neither option is choosing the right life. In the end, I learned that the bravest decisions are often the quiet ones, the ones where you choose dignity over fear, truth over comfort, and yourself over everything that tries to diminish you. If this journey resonated with you, tell me where you're listening from. And if you felt the quiet victory in this story, feel free to like, share, comment, or subscribe. Your support helps bring more stories like this to life. Here's to new beginnings, at any age.